Stitch meets art, today on Quilting Arts.
Bernina of America Incorporated. Bernina, made to create. BerninaUSA.com. Craftsy. Learn it. Make it. Craftsy.com. Havel Sewing, when you need to cut it close. HavelSewing.com.
Stitching can be its own art form and all by itself can transform your quilt design. On today's show, we're again looking at stitching and how it applies to contemporary quilting. To help us on our journey, our first guest is Ellen Ann Eddy. She has a basic lesson on darning feet and also has her tips for choosing what type of batting. Then, meet Laura Wasilowski as she arts up a traditional quilt block with fusible web. She has a fresh take on the Ohio Star. We finished up with Carol Ann Waugh and adding texture to quilted pieces with couching. I'll be right back with our first guest. Well, Ellen Ann Eddy is back with us this season. Welcome.
Thank you.
And right now we're going to be talking about different darning feet and how to stabilize your quilt sandwich when you're using your darning feet and doing free motion embroidery.
It's important. It's important.
Now it looks like we have different types of bats on the table.
We do, because your bat is part of your stabilization. Most people don't realize when they're doing regular sewing with a regular presser foot, part of what makes your stitch work is your presser foot holding everything down. And you wouldn't get a stitch without that.
Right.
So when you go to a darning foot, you're going to an embroidery hoop right in the middle of your stitch.
Okay.
But it's bouncing around, and that does two things for you. Your bounce helps you move, so it hops along.
Okay, so this is a spring in a...
It's a little spring and it hops.
Okay.
But it also doesn't give you as much stabilization. So it depends then what you have inside your sandwich.
Okay.
And I have an array here of different feet, an array of different bats. And they're set up, the different feet are set up so they will work well for different bats.
And it's good that you label them like this, because you can put this in a binder, and when you're going to do this kind of work, you can remember, okay, well, I've got, this is the stitch effect I want, this is the bat I'm using, so this is probably the foot I need.
When I do this in a class, I actually have people sew it in a book and we put a binding strip down it.
Well, let's talk about thread real quick before we go down the line to talk about this. What kind of threads do you like to do free motion and using the darning foot with?
This is a polyester 40 weight embroidery thread, and that's probably my workhorse thread.
Okay. Now, do you put it in the bobbin and the top?
Bottom and the top, strong, very able thread. Now, one of the things that's interesting is how your thread is wound. This is a metallic thread, and that's a lovely thread. It's also straight wound. Now, those don't sound like those are important differences, but they really are, because the way your thread feeds depends on how it's wound.
Okay.
If you have a cross-wound thread, it's going to be happier feeding horizontally.
Okay, so horizontal with the cross, vertical
and you should
with the straight.
have it coming back off the edge of your spool.
What do you mean
for
by
most
that?
machines. When you're working with it, this is cool. These move.
Okay.
But you should have it so it spools off to the back.
Off to the back. Okay, that's not on the inside. Off to the back.
Off to the back.
Good to know. Okay.
And your cross-wound spools mostly are happiest horizontally.
Okay, cross-wound.
Your vertical spools are going to be happiest done vertically, straight wound.
Okay.
And they're going to want to be up on a vertical pin. These are going to want to be horizontal. In either case, having something like this is great. That little sponge keeps it from spinning back.
And that keeps it consistent so the thread's coming off evenly at an
You
even
want it
pace.
to come off at an even pace, and you want your cap to be pretty much the same size
as the spool itself. Okay.
as the spool itself. And if you do that, it will spin evenly. Most of the time when you break thread and you break needles, it's because you've caught thread somewhere. If it's not catching, it's doing what you need.
Good to know. Well, that's a great way to tip for setting up your sewing machine.
You want it to be just about what it is, and if it's a little too small, you can do it so that it comes out on the other side. The thing to remember is that if one thing doesn't work, you can always try something else. And even if it isn't what is supposed to work, it's worth doing. Now, the cross example of what is different, this is a cross-wound spool, but it's also one that's happiest vertically.
Okay.
Because of the shape of the spool and how the thread is made.
It's more of a cone shape.
It's a cone. That's a king spool.
Cone shape, vertical. Okay, well, let's go back to talking about the different examples that we have on the table.
Okay, different darning feet, the biggest difference is the hole. And the bigger the hole, the less stabilization you've got. This is your regular, ordinary darning foot. And I've used it here with a regular needle-punched cotton bat. Now, this is a thinner bat, and this is done with, we have the wrong foot there. Pardon me.
That's okay, we can switch it out.
Ah, that one goes with that one. That's done with a straight stitch, and that's done with a zigzag.
Oh, okay, so it's the same foot.
And zigzag stitching is really great for motion. I love it. I love what it does.
You're kind of famous for that.
I am. Well, it makes a lot of distortion, but if you're willing to deal with it, it's such a good line. This has a much smaller hole, and so it's able to accomplish something you can't do with that. This is diaper flannel.
Oh.
And feel how thin that is.
Okay.
I don't want a quilt like that, but boy, I want a jacket out of that.
I see. So for wearable art.
For wearable art, for something where you just want a light
stabilizer.
A light stabilizer, but you're going to need a littler hole.
Okay, good to know.
This is a great foot. What this does is it rides along, it flattens things down so we can use it with larger bats, but also there's a rim there so you can measure out an echo quilt with it really easily.
Okay, so for people who like to echo quilt.
And I love this foot. This is a cutaway foot.
Yeah, the open-toed.
Wonderful, particularly if you're going to stitch maniacally.
Okay.
Because
Say
you're
that
going
again?
Maniacally.
Maniacally. Define maniacally.
Like a crazy lady.
Oh, okay, got it.
Right, if you're going to stitch all over the place.
Okay.
It gives you a way of getting in and out of your thread ends if you get caught.
Right, so you can see that. I like that. And then we've got the clear toed.
We've got that clear-toed one, and this is great for really, really fat bats.
Okay.
Now, this is an alternative for fat bats. And here I did it with zigzag because it's just fun to do because, again, it has that great big open toe.
And those are good, too, to use for those decorative stitches that have a wider width.
Right, where you want to see it, you want to see what you're doing. There are some of us who think plastic is more see-through than others.
Okay.
And I'm more of, give me a little metal rim, I can look around it, but some people like to see through the foot.
It's all about personal choice.
It's, of course. And this is a stitch regulator, and what is so cool here is they gave you all 3 feet.
So you can change them out.
So you can change them out.
That's great. Well, I'd love to see some examples of some stitching.
Okay, let's do that.
Which one would you like?
Hand me the thin one. And it's a little foot.
Okay.
And what I'm doing here is just a little quick flower because that's an easy thing to do. I've got my feed dogs down. I'm working with a straight stitch.
And you're using the polyester?
I have a polyester thread in.
That's cross-wound because that's...
And it's cross-wound, so it's horizontal. They're happiest that way. I should have its end cap on it, but I took it off to show it to you.
Which one?
And I put it right there.
Oh, okay.
But as you can see, it's behaving anyway.
So you're using a straight stitch, not a zigzag?
I'm using a straight stitch.
But you could use the zigzag with that.
You really could. Either one, because you've got a wide enough hole to accommodate you.
Well, this has been great. Ellen, thank you so much for sharing with us your knowledge about darning feet.
My pleasure.